Okay, I'm going to say up front that I love Film Masters. Film Masters is the relatively new company that over the last year has been releasing all these films that were always public domain titles, that were always the films you'd find, two or more on a disc, or a bunch on a disc, or two on a videotape from in every dollar bin everywhere you go. Film Masters is taking those films and treating them with respect, giving them the best presentations they've ever seen on home video with really good illuminating extras. A lot of them currently that they're focusing on are the Roger and Jean Corman Film Group releases from the late 50s, early 60s, the independent company that the Cormans had to make and release their own films so that they could basically just, make all the money for themselves. And the latest release is the original double feature that was released in the early 60s of The Devil's Partner and Creature from the Haunted Sea. So, 2 discs, which I love too. They're not cramming, not like the old days, they're not cramming all this on one disc and reducing the bit rate and making them look terrible. They're doing justice to how good these films do look in these new transfers. So it's 1 disc each. So we'll go disc by disc on this. Disc El Número Uno, The Devil's Partner. Copyright on the film is 1958, although it was not released until 1960-61. I think it was... Creature from the Haunted Sea is listed as 61, so I believe the double feature would have been 1961 for both of these. So Devil's Partner on screen is The Devil's Partner on all the packaging, but the on-screen title is Devil's Partner. Saved a little bit of money, I guess, on the THE titling, and directed by Charles Rondeau, and it features Edward Nelson, credited as for introducing Ed Nelson, but apparently he'd been making movies. He says in the interview here, he'd made movies for he'd done 8 films before this. Edgar Buchanan, who is Uncle Joe from Petticoat Junction, as the town doctor who's helping investigate and figuring out exactly what's going on with this Devil's Partnership here. And this is a black and white film presented in DTS Master Audio 2.0 or Dolby Digital 2.0 mono, so mono either way. There are 2 versions on here. The theatrical version, which is 1:7:8, so it'll fill your TV screen, or the TV version, which is 4:3. They're both the same length. The only difference is, one has more headroom at the top and the bottom. It's not a pan and scan situation. It's really just open matte, one way or the other. And a lot of these Film Masters releases do that, and I love it. And there's an even more interesting TV version we're going to talk about when we talk about Creature from the Haunted Sea. So it looks sharp. It looks beautiful. I found myself often getting lost in the details, looking at the signage. A lot of this takes place in a roadside cafe in a gas station. I'm reading all the packaging. I'm reading the newspapers, the magazines, stuff like that. But what is the story about You Fool, You Fool? The story opens with an old man in this shack somewhere out in the desert, and he brings in a goat, kills the goat off screen, but still it's kind of gruesome, and performs a satanic ritual asking for just a little bit more life. And it's done in a really creepy, weird way that really catches your attention. Then we go into the opening credits. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. We go into the opening credits, and young Slick Rick, Ed Sullivan, Ed Nelson, no relation, shows up and to the town saying he's looking for his uncle, who turns out to be the old dead guy, and everybody's a little suspicious about him, and he's just trying to make his way around town, find out what happened to his uncle, while people start turning up dead in accidents. Now, the film tells you, without much delay, what the deal is and what's going on, but I'm not going to tell you right here because you should really watch the movie and discover it for yourself. So it's a lot of fun. It's kind of gruesome for its era. Some of the violence in it, if not overtly explicit, is shocking in how it's conveyed. I love a good black and white shocker. These films that were so crisply shot, they almost feel like TV of the era because they were so efficiently shot, and the way they use wide shots and the way that just the editing style is. But to contrast what feels like you're watching an episode of the Andy Griffith Show with satanic rituals and murder is really kind of shocking. And apparently, I don't think there was a lot of that in film at that point. Early 60s, you were starting to get other films like this. They mentioned Horror Hotel and some other things, and Devil Rides Out and stuff like that. But I don't remember seeing a lot, not that I remember watching films in the late 50s, but I don't remember seeing from that era a lot of other films that really got into the devil worship thing. So this was kind of a pioneer in that way. The film is really fun. I really enjoyed this. It's very low key. It's not one that you've ever really... I used to do a horror host show, and we ran this on the show once, and I'd never really heard of it before we ran it, but it was one that was making the rounds in the public domain era, but it's never risen up like a lot of the other Corman produced or Corman released films have, like Little Shop of Horrors or Bucket of Blood or stuff like that. But it's really good. It's fun. It's a great late night movie because it's quiet, black and white, nice contrast, quiet. Or Saturday afternoon movie, which is how I watched it. Extras, we get a commentary by the Monster Party podcast crew, and they start off being kind of cracking wise and being wacky and doing voices, and I'm just like, oh, it's please take this seriously. And they do. They have fun with the movie, occasionally pointing out silly things or having fun with it. But there's a lot of information, there's a lot of facts, and a lot of talking about what else was going on in cinema and what else was going on with a lot of the actors at the time. So it's a good podcast. Good podcast, I should say. It's good commentary. If the commentary is that good, gotta imagine the podcast's good. You get another episode of this ongoing documentary series that's being spread across these film group releases called Hollywood Intruders: The Film Group Story Part 3. That's 21 minutes. It's excellent. It's worth seeing these. If you already own these movies, obviously they're worth it for the upgrade. Toss your old copies, because the copies of these titles that Film Group is releasing have never looked this good. And honestly, probably nobody else is going to bother to do the work that Film Group's doing for these. But also the extras are so good and so illuminating about the films themselves, but also Corman and the people who made these movies. You get Roger Corman remembering Film Group. That's an 11-minute interview. It's really, really good. And he breaks down in this, another release that has already been done by Film Group is not Film Group. I keep calling them Film Group, Film Masters. Film Masters is the company that I'm talking about who's releasing this stuff. Film Group is the company that released the movies that Film Masters is now releasing. This gets into how Film Group did it again. Film Masters has already released The Terror with Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson, partly directed by Roger Corman on Blu-ray. This extra Corman remembering Film Group gets into exactly how The Terror was constructed, and it's a really interesting story because it was shot piecemeal over a long period of time with multiple directors, some of which, like Francis Ford Coppola, you've heard of, Jack Hill, and he gets into it in that extra. There is a 2024 recut trailer that's 1.5 minutes. So that's disc 1. That is The Devil's Partner. Now we move on to disc 2, Creature from the Haunted Sea. This is from 1961. This was shot much closer. I guess Devil's Partner had been shot and kind of sat around for a while waiting for a distributor. Then Film Group Corman picked it up and released it as a co-feature with the film we're going to talk about now. Directed by Roger Corman, Creature from the Haunted Sea, with Antony, Carbone, Betsy, Jones-Moreland, and Robert Towne. Yes, the Robert Towne who went on to write Chinatown and became a hugely successful screenwriter. This was done, Corman and Co. went to Puerto Rico to basically oversee the production of a World War II film, Battle of Blood Island, and to shoot a film called Last Woman on Earth with a lot of this cast. And while they were there, they basically had enough time, or they liked the location or whatever. They get into the nitty-gritty of it on the extras. They decided to shoot another movie while they're there. So he calls Charles Griffith, who had written, I don't know if at this point he had written both or not, but Charles Griffith, who would write Bucket of Blood and Beast from Haunted Cave and Little Shop of Horrors. Why am I blanking on that? Basically called up and said, we need a script real fast. And Griffith wrote a script and got it to him, and they shot this movie, Creature from the Haunted Sea. It's black and white, looks phenomenal. Again, I guess the way, there's a title card that comes up when this starts. They didn't have perfect 35 millimeter materials for the entire film, so pieces come from a 16 millimeter source. So there are some moments where it looks a little softer, but I watched this on a really big HD 4K capable screen, and it wasn't like a huge shift in quality when it went from one to the other. Just at times, if I paid attention and looked, I could see that it wasn't quite as razor sharp, but again, it's never looked this good before. DTS Master Audio 2.0 mono, Dolby Digital 2.0 mono. You get here. Okay, here's one where it really counts. You get the theatrical version, which is only 60 minutes, maybe slightly over an hour, and it's 178, so it fills your screen. Extended TV version, 75 minutes, so 15 minutes longer, and it's 4:3. Which is what it would have been for TV. This was a common thing with the Film Group titles and a lot of the Allied Artists titles. I think it actually has Allied Artists television at the beginning of it. Allied Artists stuff, they would either shoot extra scenes for their films later, or when they were making the film, they would put things back into it to pad them out because on TV, there were so few commercials in the 50s, early 60s, mid 60s that it's not like now where a TV hour is like maybe barely 40 minutes and you have 20 minutes of commercials. Back then, a TV hour was very close to an hour. So to sell these things to TV, they needed to be longer. A 60-minute film wasn't going to fly in a slot that was always set aside for feature-length films. So they'd have to do something to pad it to at least be able to fill a 90-minute slot. So here you have all this new footage that was shot years later by Monte Hellman with a whole big pre-title sequence with Robert Towne as the secret agent that he plays in the film. I should tell you what the story is about this film. So basically the story here is the Cuban Revolution has just happened. That is told to you via voiceover in kind of quirky, fun animation. And a bunch of Cuban generals and soldiers are trying to escape once Castro's in power. They hire this gang of crooks to basically boat them and their cache of gold off to somewhere else, to the mainland, to another island, to safety, because they've been thrown out of Cuba. And the crooks decide they're going to do in or drop off or intentionally wreck the boat so that they can leave the Cubans for dead and make off with the gold, using the ruse, the false legend of this creature from the titular creature from the haunted sea. And they go, oh no, there's a creature. We gotta wreck the boat. We gotta land on an island and get out of here. And little do these crooks know that there actually is a creature from the haunted sea, which is one of the most ridiculous movie monsters you will ever see. This movie is a comedy, so bear that in mind if you see stills where you're just like, these idiots didn't know how to make a movie. No, they did know how to make a movie. They know how to make a pretty funny movie, actually. And it's really a spoof of spy films and gangster films and monster movies. So the TV version, as I was saying, has all this extra footage that was shot by Monte Hellman much later with a couple of the cast members looking a little bit different to pad this thing out. So it's fun to watch it that way, too. And a lot of us, I think when we ran this on my old horror host show, that was the version we had, because I remember that opening sequence that takes place in a nightclub with Robert Towne as just being part of the movie. So that's all a way of saying I love that Film Masters includes the TV versions, because a lot of people, that's how they always saw the film. The TV versions might have been the prints that were used, probably most likely were the prints that were used for the cheapy DVD releases and the videotape releases for years. So you hate to get this thing that's supposedly the wonderful restoration, definitive version of a film, and you pop it in and it's not the version. There's all this stuff missing. It's like when I would watch Blazing Saddles on TV. The Candygram part was always part of it, and or the extended version of that was always there. And then you watch it on video, and you're like, "This is great. They're swearing, and where's that scene I always remember?" So it's cool that they do this. Presented with English SDH subtitles for those who need them, and a commentary subtitles, which is interesting. Film Masters does this on both features. There's I guess if you have hearing trouble, it's very kind of them to put subtitles for the commentary. So looking over my notes here, I've sort of told you the whole film already. There is a guy who makes animal noises in the film. They explain in voiceover that his father was a vaudevillian who is a master of bird noises, and this guy is a master of animal noises. So a lot of times he'll say, "Can you go below deck and do whatever?" The captain will say to this guy, and he'll nod, and it'll be the sound of like a parrot, or the sound of a bird, or a hyena, or a cow. It's really bizarre, but it's this weird style of comedy that Corman had in Little Shop of Horrors and Bucket of Blood and some of those comedies where it's totally off the wall. It's borderline what they used to refer to as like sick humor, very much Mad Magazine kind of humor, especially with that opening title sequence that's animated. And it's a really fun movie. Again, it's not a great movie, but it's a fun, if you watch the TV version, it's an hour. If you watch the TV version, it's 75 minutes, which is still shorter than most movies. If you watch the theatrical, it's an hour. And again, a fun late night or Saturday afternoon film. Extras. You get a commentary on the theatrical version by Tom Weaver, Roger Corman, Kinta Zertucci, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, who was Corman's executive secretary at the time they made the movie, and Larry Blameyer. It's a really good commentary where they get into a really funny, there are always funny stories about the making of any Corman film, especially the ones that were really made on the cheap, and this is one of those. So good stories there. You get the original trailer from 16mm. You get the 2024 recut trailer that looks perfect. And you get a before and after restoration video, which I'm a huge fan of. I love the art of restoration. I love seeing how far things have come along. I remember what this looked like when we ran it on our show. It looked very smeary and dim and dark, and this looks phenomenal. So the packaging, cover there. I like that they don't use the original posters in full, but these are the original key art from the posters for both films that are on there. And in the back with information, you crack it open and you get always a hefty, sizable booklet that has 2 essays. Usually there's an essay about each film. You have an essay, The Devil's Partner by Mark McGee, about that film, and then you have one about the Creature from the Haunted Sea by Tom Weaver, and they often, again, will put the original Admar art and some of the things from the press books and things in there, which is cool because most of us cannot afford to have those in physical form. And then again, 1 film per disc. So another excellent release from Film Masters. I cannot wait to see what they are putting out next. Eventually they're going to run through all the film group stuff and bring it on. I love it. So available on Blu-ray. I keep saying Film Group. I'm so sorry. Film Masters. Available on Blu-ray from Film Masters is The Devil's Partner and Creature from the Haunted Sea. Film Masters.